Well, following this very closely outside the High Court for this week is our TalkTV reporter, Oliver Whitfield-Beerchich. He joins us again now. Good morning to you, Ollie.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it was fascinating watching the coverage yesterday and then hearing what was being claimed by the Prince. Can we go through a few of the statements he's made? We've got them. We can put up on the screen. But it was interesting when he actually hit out not just at the media, but at the government as well. A bit of a broadside of the government. Our country, he said, is judged globally by the state of our press and our government, both of which I believe are at rock bottom. What did he mean by that?
Well, he's also calling for press regulation, which is another part of his crusade against the British tabloid press. But he is taking quite an unusual stance here for a royal, former or not, because the royal family's unofficial motto is never complain, never explain. And then the second part is to never have any sort of political interference. Now, this was both of those. It was complaining, it was explaining, and it was putting himself in a politically unneutral position. Some commentators believe that this is not the right way for him to be going. He is here to fight a claim against Mirror Group newspapers about his privacy being breached, about the unlawful information gathering tactics that are being alleged. By taking on this fight with the government, some are saying that this is a distraction that he doesn't need.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it was almost like he was firing, rounds at everybody and anybody. He also had to say on the government, democracy fails when your press fails to scrutinise and hold the government accountable and instead choose to get into bed with them so they can ensure the status quo. Oh, I'd love it if Prince Harry had spoken out about lockdowns when he was locked away in his Montecito mansion. Some of us do try to hold the government accountable. I think that's what journalists largely, not during lockdown, do try to do. And yet what he's really criticising there, I think, isn't the government so much or the media. He's actually criticising Buckingham Palace. And we saw that in the Netflix documentary. We saw that in Spare and many of the interviews, Oprah Winfrey and others, where actually he's saying, look, I've been held back. I had to leave the royal enclosure, the Goldfish Bowl, because they weren't acting in my best interest. They were in cahoots with the media, and it was Buckingham Palace that were doing everything. It's always about boosting Charles and Camilla, William and Kate. I'm the spare, I don't matter, and I was expendable. I think his battle there is actually with Buckingham Palace, isn't it?
I think it's with Buckingham Palace, but I also think it is with the government, because the later part of that statement, he said basically that the press barons, those who own the massive media houses and the tabloids here in this country, are in cahoots with the government, and as they have said so themselves, there will be no press regulation that comes through. Now, after the Leveson inquiry, there was a voluntary press standards organisation which appeared for the tabloid press called Ipso. Not all of the tabloids or newspapers are joined into that. What he wants to see is press regulation right across the UK. While broadcasters have got the regulator Ofcom, which does have teeth, which can impose fines, some say that Ipso does not have enough clout and cannot stop any of the infringing behaviours that we've seen of the past. But others will say that will impinge on a free press in the UK, which they see as a sacrosanct right. So a very delicate balance to achieve when it comes to press freedom and press regulation.
Yeah, indeed. There's another quote he made about the tabloid press, in particular about the intrusion in his private life. He said, at no point did I have a girlfriend or a relationship with anyone without the tabloids getting involved and ultimately trying to ruin it, using whatever unlawful means at their disposal. And this is where he's sort of gone further, I think, than before, where it's not just that what he claims that the media intrusion into his life, and then look, we can't doubt there has been media intrusion. I mean, Buckingham Palace themselves have intruded into his life when when his own parents decide to have footage of him on his first day at school. That is kind of part of the deal of the royal family, having that public role. But he's claiming it's not just there was intrusion and it had the effect of hurting his relationships, but he's basically claiming that it was the desire, it was the intentions of the tabloid media to hurt him, to damage him and ruin his life. And that's where this has kind of got a bit over the top. And we are moving well away from facts and evidence and the court case he's bringing into his personal, as you say, his personal crusade and his feelings.
Well, it's very hard to prove an allegation like that when it's somebody's desire, because it's how do you prove a desire or a thought? It's a lot easier to say, I know that X has happened, and then to supply evidence of X happening. And so far, that is where Prince Harry has struggled. What I thought was really telling was at the end part of that quote where he was talking about his relationship, he then went on to say there was always a third presence. And I thought that harks back to what his mother, Princess Diana, said in that explosive Panorama interview. There was always three of us in this relationship. He has always seen it as his relationships that he has had, and then the press there, because he says even when he was on holiday, Buckingham Palace would arrange for him and his brother to sit down, do a photo shoot, so that the tabloid press, or in the hope that the tabloid press would leave them alone for the rest of those trips. So he's always seen the press as this unnecessary evil on the side, but it's had to be part of his life.
But it has been part of the life. But again, often he's getting confused often between the tabloid press and paparazzi, who are law unto themselves, and you know, and in other countries. And actually, you know, often it's not, when you see these packs of photographers, apart from something like a court case like this, it's actually not, you know, the British media, it's international media. Here's another statement he said: my voicemails would include incredibly private and sensitive information about my relationships. I experienced hostility from the press since I was born. And this is where we get into this paranoia, don't we? And this was a massive theme in that 55-page witness statement that was released ahead of his appearance in court, but also the testimony that he did give over those 5 hours, where this belief that, you know, everyone's out to get him. And that he couldn't trust anybody, even, you know, staff at Buckingham Palace, his closest friends, relationships with girlfriends like Chelsea Davy were ruined, and also even trust in his own brother. I mean, I think a lot of us would have a lot of sympathy with him on that, if it wasn't for the hypocrisy of the fact that he then has happily trashed the privacy of his own family by selling all his secrets and the family secrets to Netflix and to Penguin Books for his spare memoir.
I think that's the contradiction that a lot of people are struggling with here. How can you bring a claim for privacy and then go and do all of the things that you have just mentioned? But, you know, the relationship that he's had with his brother being played out in front of the cameras, in the books bare, all of that information can now be used in this court case. And as we were saying yesterday, that court case in America, which deals with the drug revelations that he'd taken cocaine, magic mushrooms, as well as marijuana, that case is now also rumbling on, and the evidence that was being given here could also be used in that case. And so it's very difficult here for the Prince to try to stick to his legal arguments, because what his team want him to do is give very broad answers, talk about those feelings and the animosity, and to say that the Mirror journalists are the ones who should be here answering the questions, because we know from the Mirror side that there's not that many who are going to be appearing. But what the Mirror's side is trying to say is, look, show us the evidence. We need the evidence, otherwise your case is not going to work.
And that's the key thing here. This isn't an Oprah Winfrey interview. This isn't talking to his ghostwriter or writing his memoirs. This is talking to a friendly journalist, hand-picked and asked the difficult questions. This is a court of law. It's the judge that's going to make the decision. He's already, you know, should we say, what is it? He surprised the judge, didn't he, by not turning up on the first day. But fundamentally, this is going to be judged on the facts. But the reality is he only needs to win one of these. He's kind of almost like one of the test cases for these, a whole branch of people. He's claimed 33 articles were he believes in the public domain as a result, he claims, of criminal activity. A number of those have already fallen apart. You know, the information that came from a Buckingham Palace press release, something that's already been in the newspapers, something that he himself had given in an interview the day before. I mean, one by one, these have been torn apart. But he only needs one of these to be judged to possibly have come from criminal activity for him to perhaps have a stronger case.
Yeah, and I think we've seen two examples of that where potentially the Prince might have a winning argument. The first one, when he took a return flight after visiting Chelsea Davy, he says that somehow the Mirror was able to obtain the exact date that he was going to be flying back. That information was highly personal, highly sensitive, and something that Buckingham Palace would have never ever released to the press. He says that nobody would have known that apart from himself and a very close-knit circle of friends. And then there was another story about when he called glandular fever what the paper dubbed kissing disease. They then ran a full-page spread on that on the front page of that day's newspaper. He said he'd only told his very closest family and friends. It was something he was deeply ashamed and embarrassed of. And when that story went out, it then caused him to be bullied by his peers. They avoided him. He was taken the mickey out of. Now, on those cases, it is going to have to be, I think, for the Mirror to prove, actually, that they got that information from somewhere else, because the Mirror's barrister has been standing up in court and saying this information came from the news agency, the Press Association. This one came from the Buckingham Palace press office, but we haven't yet heard exactly where all of the information has come into or come from those two cases.
Although, of course, I mean, the duty of this case is for Harry and his team to prove that there was criminal wrongdoing. And just in terms of what is happening today, Prince Harry presumably turning up in we'd think probably an hour or so's time, 10:30, back on the stand. And how long have the lawyers got to question him today?
Yeah, so we're expecting Prince Harry to rock up back here in his navy blue Range Rover. Yesterday he was here about an hour before proceedings began, so it'll be interesting to see if he does spend that hour again with his lawyers going through their talking points in the small ante-room set up next to the court for him to use. Then 10:30, back on the witness stand. The cross-examination continues, going through each newspaper story, article by article, and it's expected that he will be here until at least the lunchtime break.
Okay.
Now, usually that has been at around 1 o'clock. Potentially, though, the judge had said on Monday, if the opposing side needs longer, the court will sit for even longer.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for covering this with us, Oliver Whitfield-Mirchich. Thank you for that.